Well, hello, Cool Cat viewers. We are about a minute delayed, but I kind of view that as pretty much right on time. So guys, welcome to yet another episode of KatViews. We hope you've enjoyed a few of the ones that we've had with some of our special guests and got your questions answered with regards to AR with Chris Sigao previously. And we've, of course, had the digitalization of performance in video with Tyrell Green. And so hopefully those have been informative. Today's webinar is no less action-packed. You're really gonna, I think, enjoy this one, get a lot of content out of it, get a lot of get excited about it and also get a lot of valuable information, whether you're a performer who is looking to get into film potentially, or a producer that works with, let's say, music videos or film, and you aspire to be, let's say, an award-winning film producer, or whether you are a choreographer who works with film and media and music videos and etc., and wants to just understand a little bit about how maybe producers view your involvement in the films, and also maybe some of the legal considerations that you should keep in mind when stepping into that sort of field. So once again, of course, we're going to talk through our host venue, where we are. We're going to showcase some of the beautiful costumes that we have at Cool Cat in our costume corner. And so I do encourage you to tune in. We'll keep it short. We'll keep it to about 30 minutes so you can get on with your Monday evening. But yes, welcome to the show. All right, so just in case you didn't know about Cool Cat, that was me kind of showing off a little bit about what we do with, you saw some of our shows and different acts that we can stage. So of course, you're more than welcome to get in touch with us for any show and entertainment needs. But on to our webinar. So every webinar, you guys know that I'm always talking about a new host venue that we are in. This time is no different. We are in beautiful Long Point. For those of you that have never been in Long Point, it is a stretch just east basically of Lake Erie, stretching right along Lake Erie. It's gorgeous. And so let us showcase our host. We are at Lucky 7, this is Long Point of what I'm talking about, and we are at Lucky 7 Cottage. So any corporate viewers that are watching, you're welcome to use the cottage as a corporate retreat. We've had a lot of parties that also use it for award ceremonies, for just a chance to get to know each other, mix and mingle. We have had entertainment here as well. Of course, for music videos, for film shoots, the cottage is available. And as always, I always will feature a new fantastic venue every time we do this webinar. So guys, tune in for Lucky 7 Cottage. This is basically where I will, let me see, I can pull up where you can get in touch. But yes, this is Lucky 7 Cottage on Long Point. Okay, that's our host venue for tonight. That's where we are. And welcome. So you guys can sort of experience the cottage life with me today, potentially. Okay, but without further ado, I do want to get to the fun and exciting part of our webinar today, because we have a very, very special guest with us this evening, who's made time for us out of his busy schedule on a Monday night. And this is an incredible award-winning film producer who has shown his films in over 100 film festivals globally. That includes TIFF, that includes Fantasia, that includes the Berlin Film Festival, Florida Film Festival, all over Toronto. And we're very, very excited to have him. You're going to get a chance to also ask him questions, so make sure you actually comment in the question field as you're watching the webinar. And there is a prize if your question gets selected to ask Ryan. So do pay attention and tune in. He has some very, very valuable advice to share with, as I mentioned, artist involvement in films, choreographer involvement in films, how the whole production process takes place. And you will just absolutely, I think this will be an incredible experience for you guys. I would like to welcome Ryan Reaney of Fear and Desire Productions as our very special guest tonight. And are you guys ready to see? Because I am. Let's bring Ryan on board. And we want the live Ryan, so I'll just hide his face over there. Hi, welcome, Ryan. Thanks so much for tuning in.
Thanks for having. Hi, Cool Cat fans.
Well, guys, please meet Ryan. We are very excited that he's taken time out of his busy schedule to be with us. And so, Ryan, I want to maybe first familiarize our guests with you, with your background, with maybe some of the works that you've done. I think the list just goes on and on and on. As I was reading on IMDb, it's fantastic, some of the works that you've done to date. And so, but I'll let you take the floor, maybe speak to a little bit of what you've done and sort of how you've been involved with the film scene, not just in Toronto, but globally as well.
Yeah, well, like you said, I'm a Canadian film producer. You know, I actually started at art school, went to Canada's Premier Art College at OCAD, had friends at Ryerson doing film production, and through that, I somehow ended up in film. Ended up working my way up throughout the industry, you know, working in various capacities. So the good part about that is learning all the different aspects of the industry and sort of knowing those facets, which is basically what a producer needs to do, is knowing everything without, you know, specializing within it. And so, you know, you can speak on those roles. From there, I basically worked in various media formats, anything from music videos, commercials, animation, documentaries, feature film, and that's what I specialize in is feature film. So my films have played all around the world, like you said, over 100 film festivals globally. Specifically, one film played in literally 100 film festivals, and many of them playing in various other ones globally, winning different types of awards all around. And so currently I'm working in both television and feature films. Right now I'm shooting a TV show, literally taking some time away on set right now. Luckily to be with you and your review.
Thank you for making the time. I guess we'll keep that under wraps about what that TV show is, so don't give it all away.
Yeah, it will be coming out later in the fall, but you'll see the credits come up online later on. And, yeah. So as being part of a producer, you know, I deal a lot with contracts and you know, agreements and things like that. So a lot of the things is to deal with, you know, the paperwork, the behind the scenes things that most performers and most creatives don't normally think about, but they should at really early on, because it sort of formulates and helps sort of determine how things go for you throughout a production. And by doing so, you know, I actually took some entertainment law classes just to get my skills up, you know, to beyond what they need to be. And so I specialized in doing some of that. I don't have a law degree, but I do have a certificate in law, in entertainment law, based on that.
Yeah, and I think that's what a lot of actually, coming from a world, so we are entertainment producers, so we work with a lot of, you know, choreographing live entertainment, and choreographing the shows and getting the dancers on board, and sometimes, you know, participating in music videos. But I think looking at it from that perspective, it's totally different. Live events versus, you know, on film and on camera and on television. And creatives, as you well put it, they oftentimes forget about all the different legal considerations that are at play and all the contractual considerations that are at play, and you know, they're happy to perform and be involved. But I think without knowing some of the background of how a film gets created, what are the things you're dealing with as a producer, it can sometimes make the world of both the artist and the producer difficult if they don't quite understand what they're dealing with, right? And what each responsibilities and rights are basically with regard to each other's roles. And so maybe before we jump into more of the legal considerations, I think it would be helpful for those artists or choreographers that are aspiring or maybe have been involved to a lesser extent in film production, just to understand the stages that you go through as a producer to actually produce a film. So walk us, like, what are the A to Z stages in brief of a film production?
Well, that's a very broad and in-depth conversation to have, but in short form, it's basically you know, finding a concept or an idea, a script. You know, it can actually be something that's already written, like a play, you know, a treatment or whatever, or it can be an idea that somebody has and that you develop together. You know, and at some point, you and the creative, the producer and the creative, or whoever that person might be, come to put it on paper and then contract that thing. And then once you have a document or a treatment or a script or whatever it is, then you formulate a team. So that would be potentially be, you know, your director, your actor, your, you know, all the fun people involved on that side of it. and then getting it financed. So being able to get the money to pay those people, and then figuring out a distribution plan, and the many other aspects there. So that comes in play early on that most people don't actually think of, because you have to have that in place early for you to have that project succeed.
And that all happens even before you start the financing or the casting round, right? You have to have all those elements sort of in play.
Yeah. Or then, sometimes you just have a wealthy individual just wants to, make a musical. And
we love those art supporters.
Yeah. And we're all looking for one of those. But
so hold on, let me bring this back up. If you want to email Ryan to help with funding film, then you're welcome to.
Please. Yeah. So yeah, once you formulate a plan in terms of what the project's going to be and the financing model and that type of thing, you normally want to deal with marketing and distribution earlier on, because you want it to succeed. And before, you're going to need some of those elements while you're going into production. And that may actually help determine what you'll be shooting and how you will be shooting it, or how that project may go, because you might want to do a project based on Gen Z. And they have a specific type of content that they like to view, and they tend to view it on their phones, as opposed to doing something that you might be thinking for large screen. So it's knowing your audience and how to reach out to them and speak to them in the way that they want to be received in.
And I guess that all is tied into the finances as well, that you're able to secure, right, to know your limitations and
Mm-hmm. And so once you're able to secure actually the financing, that's when you actually go into production. And that's when you might actually be engaging some individuals and some creatives, and maybe bringing the actors on at that stage. Depending on, sometimes some actors might be involved a little earlier on, because you might need a big name star to help get some of that financing involved. It just depends on what type of project you're working on. And then you go into production, which is always the fun part, some people say, also the challenging. And then from production, you go into post-production, which is the editing and the visual effects and all the enhanced elements from there, which then you actually sometimes do audience feedback screenings, where you'll send them to audience and get notes from a general audience and how your film's performing. May actually go back in the editing room, and you may actually go and reshoot some things because you got something right, but it wasn't quite working for some of the audience. And then once you actually lock the picture, then you go into distribution, which can be, large or small, depending on what you're looking at doing. That distribution, before you go into that, you might do a festival run. So you might do playing at film festivals around the world before you actually go and try to show it in the theaters. Some films go specifically to theaters, other films go directly to like VOD or like iTunes directly, or sometimes they go straight to TV.
And so the film festival, is that an avenue to help distribute the films, if you will, as to which avenue they're going to be successful at?
Well, yeah, they're all different models of filmmaking. Film festivals are mostly for awards and acclaim and to get noticed. So if you have a film that is already very noticed, some film festival, or some people will put their film in a film festival just for the prestige. And you'll see some Hollywood films play at like TIFF or some other ones, just so they can have a red carpet experience, and just so they can get a little bit more buzz on the film, as opposed to just going straight to theaters, even though it's playing worldwide. You've got a film playing at Cannes, and you're like, why is this, this major actor playing in this art house film festival? It's just so that they can have that cachet of it.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, you're looking for, global exposure. So film festivals help with that exposure, you as an artist or the film in general. And from there, you're either winning awards or just, getting to a broader audience. And some films don't actually have a distributor attached, and they're going to film festivals to actually try to get some business sides of things. So getting a distributor, getting some sales, and getting some things on that end. And so after the festival, then you go distribution and selling. So you can distribute in your own country, so in film or in the theater, or directly to TV or VOD, depending on the platform and model that you're doing. And then from there, you're going to sell internationally. So you may have a sales agent that sells your project at various markets around the world, at like Cannes or Berlin or Toronto. Those are the sort of the big three or the American film market, and they're trying to sell your film to foreign buyers to then show it in smaller countries all around the world, where you're hopefully going to make some money and see a broader audience and get global feedback from your film. And from that point, that process can take years in terms of generating revenue, hopefully, if your film is a success.
It can be years until from the start of the project until you actually get to the completion and success of the project, if you will. Yeah, so it's always a long-term thinking game, which is what I think, tying it back to sort of creatives' involvement, there is a lot of patience and sort of long vision that performers need to have in mind when they are getting involved with film, and I think sometimes at least I have personally known performers that have a very short-sighted view of their involvement in the film, and that's often not the case. And so I think that's one of the key takeaways as well that they need to have when thinking about a film, is that the producer is dealing with budgeting and financing and cast and sort of how all the pieces of the puzzle come into play. And so no, that was I think very informative for people, especially that are trying to get into film, just to know what it actually takes from a producer standpoint to get before they actually start the casting portion of it.
One area that I just sort of skipped over as part of the distribution is marketing, which is a huge thing, which you need to start really early on, basically in pre-production and in production, is marketing your film, and then the actors and the creatives involved on the project. And they might be doing either tweets or on-set or pre-rehearsals or behind-the-scenes things or iPhone videos, all to capture these elements that you can exploit in a positive manner the project itself to try to sell it later on. And then once it explodes into the audience globally, you're going to want to put all these items online, and then you may be doing interviews with these cast, and these cast now may be on another project, and there's other needs from this other project that they want them for another press junket while you're trying to do the same type of thing. So it becomes a juggling act of actors' availability and creatives just trying to oh, well, our film's playing at this film festival, but your actor can't be in it because they're shooting a film in Taiwan or something. Yeah, it becomes an interesting game of juggling.
Well, I think, it's very similar to let's say, live stage production, I think, in that element. Yeah. But before we move on to your second question, because I have a whole bunch of them in my head, but I have tried to condense to see what we, would get in a short amount of time, I do want to also remind the audience that are watching, there is a chance for you to win a prize if you actually, and in which case it's a 1-hour ballroom dance lesson from Cool Cat. So if you've always been dying to learn ballroom or Latin dancing, we can have you for an hour in the studio. And so how to win, I guess that's your next question. So basically, enter questions for Ryan in the comments section to the webinar on Facebook as you tune in. And if we select your question, has to be appropriate. And if it gets selected, then you can win. Okay, so guys who are tuning in, do feel free to leave us a comment and you could win a prize. Now, before we move on to Ryan's second question and give the audience a little bit of time, I just want to go through our costume corner and have you guys take a look at some of the new costumes that we have at Cool Cat, and give Ryan a little bit of a breather to finish talking. And so here you go. You see, I always confuse my videos. There we go. So guys, what's been really in style lately is a Vogue cabaret type of costume, okay? So this is more of a modern take on costuming where we do use metallics and silver and gold options. We were just actually at the All-Star Gala for Sick Kids demonstrating this outfit, which is, I'm gonna just take that banner out so you could see. Lots of claws, lots of metallics in play, more Vogue style cabaret. And so if you are interested in having these sorts of dancers at your event, we can do a solo, we can do a duet act or a group act, and you're welcome to contact us about costume rentals as well. So we are big on Vogue and metallics and claws. And so anyways, just wanted to do that little showcase, and we are going to move right back to Ryan. And we're going to ask it. Oh, I think we do have a question from the audience. Let me just take a look. In process, so we're going to stay tuned for that. But Ryan, this is my question to you moving on. Now back to your legal background. So what are the key legal considerations for A, a producer, and B, the artist, with regard to specifically artistic property during their involvement with the film? So meaning as a choreographer, let's say they step in and they choreograph a certain section for a background, dance routine or a feature dance routine, what have you. In, let's say, live stage production, there's contracts in place that say we own the rights to this choreography and it can't be replicated or it can't be duplicated, and you sign off on all the rights. Sometime, or there can't be filming of any kind to replicate this choreography. So there's contracts like that in place that I know we've worked with live theater. Sometimes choreographers have challenged this and would like to get credit for their contribution to the work, and of course the ability to potentially stage it with potential proceeds floating back to the theater live show. So curious to hear how that plays out in a film producer setting, or a film production setting rather, both from producers and an artist, in this case more choreographer standpoint.
Well, there's basically three main considerations there. There is copyright, there's ownership, and there's revenue. So so it's basically who's the original copyright holder. That doesn't necessarily have to be the creator of that piece. In Canada, it can be the creator, but in the States, you could be a work for hire. So there's a little bit of a difference between Canadian law and American law, where you would be basically engaged from a company or a stage company, potentially as a performer or as a choreographer, to put on a show, and they have a vision, they have a concept, they want you to help facilitate that. Well, in Canada, it's a little bit different, where you're a work for hire, where this you're as an independent contractor or you're independent creative, and you would retain your copyright for that project, even though you're working on it. So you might actually retain the copyright for it, but not have full control of what happens to it. So you're not releasing your copyright, but you're releasing your ownership to it. So there's a little bit of a difference. One is creative control, and one is ownership control. So you want to just differentiate those. But in essence, for me as a producer, it's all about revenue. So making sure you have the right paperwork and the right ownership to exploit this property, to basically make money with it, and being able to either sell it or spin it off, or to do whatever you can to try to, earn revenue.
And so let's say if an artist is coming in and, they're the perfect fit for the role, or the choreographer, or what have you, and have there been situations where the ask is to split the revenue proceeds from that specific feature act? Let's say it's going to be the basis of the show. Let's say it's a musical, right, that you're filming. Have there been situations where choreographers will request a split to the revenue that's generated by the film, or is that typically, as you said, sort of ownership and revenue rights, float back to the producer, and then more copyright is sort of, they maybe have a part in the copyright to the choreography? So
yeah. For a choreographer to have sort of back-end ownership or any revenue based on their participation in a project, they'd have to be somebody very, very, very famous, sort of like a Bob Fosse or somebody of that stature, where their name and that cachet brings the revenue to a project, as opposed to a work for hire who's somebody who might not be as well known. It's the same thing as an actor who says, well, I'm a big star, I should get some back-end participation. So if you're of such an international level, that might be a conversation to be had. But even with the major international choreographers that I've known or that I've dealt with, dealing on major productions, and we've flown someone in from Australia, and they're pretty big, and they've done huge movies. They're not getting that back end. They're not getting that revenue. They might be getting a very, very high salary, and their participation in the project and potentially avenues of exploiting their work, but they're not actually getting revenue in the project because they're being brought on to facilitate a director's vision or to collaborate with that director in that project.
Right. But, so they would get credit to the work, but that's sort of the extent of it. And then they sign off any use or reproduction or I guess, exploitation for media purposes, what have you.
Yeah, and then it comes into, you know, getting a good lawyer and then figuring out who gets rights for what, because the person might be engaged to generate a performance for this one movie, and then it's the dance steps for that movie. Are they the copyright retained with the, you know, with the original creator, but the ownership for them and the exploitation of them, if somebody wants to redo that movie later on, and those same dance steps are for movie purposes or for any media purposes, that's one thing. But potentially, you know, a choreography might try to retain ownership for those dance steps to perform them on live avenues, but not necessarily a stage performance of the movie, but potentially just dance performances. And so that's where you have to make sure all your, you know, all your paperwork is in place, because they might want to be showing and exploiting that property, and they might be able to get revenue from just doing dance performances for that, as opposed to the full show, and not, you know, just showing snippets or, you know, small sections, either for their promotional purposes or for small revenue purposes.
Right.
But that's where you have to actually, you know, negotiate very well.
And that's actually coming back, you took it off the tip of my tongue. When it comes to negotiation, is there much room that a producer, let's say, or rather an artist has with a producer when negotiating a contract, or is it typically quite set in stone, and it's sort of, there's such a big casting for the choreographer that typically artists don't feel they have the leverage to do so?
With choreographers specifically, it's really tough to have a lot of leverage there. If you're, it depends what you're asking for, because there are a lot of people, and unless you're bringing something to the project that is well above and beyond what that project would already have if they hired somebody else of your caliber. So, you know, if you do have a name, and if you are going to bring, you know, butts to seats is the expression, basically revenue to this project, if by your participation in this project, you're going to sell 10,000 more tickets, then that might be a different conversation than, you know, hiring a local artist who's going to collaborate, and, you know, there is no cachet involved there. But, you know, they can still negotiate or have their agent negotiate. I deal a lot with agents who always negotiate for their artist in the best favor, because they got on very well with the director or the other producer, or, you know, some of the part of the creative team where they think it's just going to be in sync very well, or the actor really likes them and wants to work with them. And, you know, that might be a key thing in place. Their salary might get a little bit higher, but, you know, their rights probably won't be, you know, given back.
Yeah. And so just to sum it up then, basically when somebody is looking to, just so that they understand correctly, again, going back to sort of, there's the copyright rights, there's the ownership, and then there's the revenue component, right? So just making sure that an artist is thinking about all three of these, keeping it in mind. But I guess perhaps it is best to carry on a negotiation with an agent rather than so directly, because there is, you know, the creative, the logical sort of mind that comes in play. But okay, no, that's helpful. I think even for me, when I'm thinking of through theater production, it's similar, but I think because of the longevity of the film, oftentimes it is a little different, because you have, you know, constant involvement and repeat views and etc., as opposed to a theatrical production that may be just done once. Okay, and so I want.
The one thing I do want to mention on that, though, is a lot of the applications, even with theater, there's some arts council applications and or funding body applications, and some funding organizations, or just even the venue that they're hosting it at. They have to have their legals in place to show and exploit all aspects of the production itself, and that includes the choreography. So some of them require that the director or the producer of that project own full control of the property.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So, and that may be a requirement for the avenue that they're showing. So that would frame the conversation that would be having. So the producer, even if they wanted to, might not even be able to allow, you know, to give up some of those rights, because they require them contractually for their funders or for the venue that they're hosting it.
So that's an interesting point to bring up too, is that producers are often locked into other contracts with their funding partners or shareholders or whoever's in the film to actually have full rights to whatever's happening in the film. Okay, interesting. Well, good thing to keep in mind. And I will just again remind our audience that we do still have a couple of more minutes for the Watch to Win contest. So you guys are welcome to ask Ryan a question to win a ballroom dance lesson. Enter your questions in the comment box. And I have one last question from my side. And so in being a producer for theater and for, live stage productions, there are challenges that arise with choreographers and performers and, different visions for the production versus what the artist would like to put forward. And so keeping that in mind, I guess I would want to ask you, what has been the biggest challenge for you as a producer in working with performers, or it could be actors, it doesn't have to necessarily be dancers or choreographers, but what has been your biggest challenge that maybe you've had to overcome? Because you've done, I just want to give the audience some background, Ryan's done, various genres, whether it's thriller or comedy or drama or romance, I think, you name it. I think he just mentioned the only ones I haven't is pornography probably, but outside of that, pretty much every other genre. So I'm sure you're dealing with a lot of different personalities, and just, curious what has been the biggest challenge?
Yeah, well, personalities are normally one of the biggest challenges, and sometimes it's getting the performance on the day, and actors can agree to something or have a vision of something with your creative team prior to either that choreographer or that director, and they have a plan going into the day, and when you're there actually to execute that performance, it's not working. And then just making sure that you're getting it on screen or on stage, and that performance is actually popping. Sometimes, the director, they have a great relationship, and sometimes that relationship can fray, or, you're just not having it on day. And then, myself as a producer is try to mitigate some of those situations and just navigate to try to, help so both parties are, being at their best. And, sometimes that could be, an actor being willing to do an intimate scene prior to, and then that the day that they come, they're just not feeling their body shape in that way, and they don't want to be as vulnerable as they might have, and then trying to work through that scene with the director, and they may have had a previous relationship, or there are so many different scenarios where things can come up, and it's just it's always a balancing act to make sure that whatever you're putting out there as a creative entity is at the best quality that it can be. And even if the performer wants that and the director wants that, we sometimes get in our own way. So it's trying to find the best way to bring that out within people. And that's hopefully what the director's there doing. And sometimes, you've got to help them reevaluate and realign to that same goal.
That, especially when it gets to relationships, that's a disaster. Yes, I agree. Have you ever had a diva performer that, let's say, was on set and just had to walk out because something didn't quite align with their vision? Has that happened?
I try not to tell stories outside of school, but there have been some instances where the performer did not want to perform as previously agreed to, where then it becomes a longer conversation and slow things down and take a step back and let's have a breath and let's figure out, what do you want to do? What do you feel comfortable with? Here's the original vision. Here's what we want to do as a project, as a film, and the best needs for the film and the best needs for that performer. So you're working in a positive and open space for that creative collaboration, hopefully to flourish and have something special.
Now, this question just came out of my mind, but I know we're going to wrap up shortly. But in cases like that, where an artist does not necessarily fulfill their obligations to the film, have there been cases where the producers feel it is worthwhile their time to go after a legal battle after the artist?
I myself haven't. It's very rare if that is something that happens. That's normally where an actor won't perform or is performing so badly that either they're substance abuse issues, or there's some other things where they cost millions of dollars because a project goes down for various reasons. And that's when an insurance claim would have to go in, and then that's normally when the insurance company actually enforces clauses, and suits actually get filed on that way, as opposed to a producer trying to go forward, because it is a very small industry. People don't like to be litigious because it's a very expensive cost as well, and it's better to work things out privately than through the court system.
then go through the courts. Yeah, no, it's definitely something that I think both parties should be cognizant about, right? Because I think there have been scenarios where both producers and artists have violated their rights with regards to being in film. And so, yeah, it definitely is sometimes a gray zone. But I've had a lot of actually occurrences with, particularly, I'm going to relate it back to theater. But when you are in theater, you know, some of the venues or theaters, they take the position of the full ownership and, you know, might not be respectful of the rights of the artists, and in which case, you know, legal battles are expensive, and so then nobody really pursues that avenue. And so they just, you know, choose not to go via that route. And so I know it might happen in film, but I'm hoping that, you know, less people take that avenue of cutting the contract terms in lieu of not getting prosecuted for it.
Yeah, the one thing, you know, as I always mention, is have it on paper, you know, contract things down, and just make sure all parties are in agreement and full understanding of what the actual ramifications of some of those clauses are. Because sometimes you can paper something and you can have a contract in place, but it's a little vague. It just says you're doing this, but what is that really meaning when you say we're going to split revenue? But how do you actually define splitting, and how do you find revenue, and who is collecting it and who is splitting it? You know, it's once you get down to those details, and if you work things out in advance, it solves a lot of problems down the road, because it's clear cut. This person does this, that person does the other, and you just make sure it happens. And if it doesn't, that's when it's like, it's very cut and dry for anyone adjudicating those matters, even if you just go to small claims court, where it's all written down, it was all priorly understood. And if that other party didn't actually execute to what they agreed to, then it becomes quite easy to prosecute if you needed to do so.
Got it. Well, Ryan, I'm going to just once again remind everyone of how they can get in contact with you. So that's just, guys, oh, this is one thing that I forgot to go through is, when you go onto Ryan's IMDb page, you will see a lot of the various films that he's been producing. And I'm just going to quickly share the screen so you guys can tune into this yourselves. But if you want to check out Ryan's works, have a look. I mean, A Night of Horror International Film Festival, Canadian International Film Festival, Edmonton International Film Festival. The list just goes on and on. Florida International Film Festival, Toronto After Dark Film Festival. So really different genre as well. And actually, speaking of some of the works that you have won awards for, I'm just going to bring this up for our audience so that they can see. Distilled Love was one of the films, and Ryan, maybe you can speak a little bit to that, and then also I'll just showcase all of the films, and then I'll let you speak to them briefly. We have Blood Honey. I'm just going to hide that. We have Blood Honey, and then one more, which has won, I think, numerous awards as well, has been The Portal to Hell. So I'll let you speak through that briefly, and just describe to us what those films were about, what you're most proud of with those films, and you know, where can people go to watch the films as well if they would like to understand a little bit more about your works.
Yeah, well, a lot of the films you know you can see on YouTube, or sorry, not YouTube, but iTunes or various streaming platforms. You know, you basically have to look by name because they're on various different platforms and avenues. But you know, in terms of those, the Distilled Love was a great film, played all around the world, won quite a few awards. You know, it was a fun little project with a writer-director, a director who was dating the writer, who was also the actress, and you know,
oh my God,
fun situations on set with that one. But,
I hope that's not the conflict one that you were referring
no,
to.
that was not that one. That was a different one. But that was a lovely little short film that did pretty well. The one Portal to Hell there, that is a shorts to feature, which we basically made a pilot or a small teaser for a feature film called Portal to Hell. It starred Roddy Piper from WWE wrestling from the 80s, who you may actually know from They Live, famous actor. He was one of the nicest gentlemen I've ever got a chance to work with. Unfortunately, he passed away, so we're just looking at recasting that now and making it into a feature film. And then the last one there was Blood Honey, starring Sinead Beach-Grimes, who's a great Canadian actress. You might know her from 90210 or Degrassi. She's now on CBC with her own television show starring as a detective. and that is played all around the world as well. And you can catch that on Super Channel in Canada, and then also streaming iTunes and various other platforms as well.
That's awesome. So very accessible for people to view your films, which is great. And we actually do have a question from the audience, which I'm going to put on the screen here. And it is from Anton. And I think we addressed this partially, but what is the best way to work with actors filming short music or dance videos, on commission or on a fixed rate? So I think he's asking from the perspective of a producer. If you are working with actors or dancers on a short music video or dance video or film, is the rate better on commission or fixed? I hope I got that right.
Okay. Well, in terms of, you've got to understand the scope of the project. So if you're working within a union project, there are union rates which are defined, and you have to meet those minimums. Depending on the caliber of the artist and their cachet, that rate might increase exponentially. You've got many six-figure deals for high-level actors around the world. But most projects are working with scale actors or just above scale or things like that. But if you're working in a non-union realm, then it's a matter of what the budget can afford in terms of what the scope of the project is, what type of financing, what's realistic for the project. You can't pay 50% to one person and then the rest of the money for everything else. It's just working what actually can meet the needs of the project itself. But going back to the question,
it can be different, right? It can vary in different scenarios, essentially.
Yeah, there's so many various scenarios. Sometimes, actors will work at $1, but they get back-end participation, and they can make a lot more potentially if the film does a lot very, very well. There are many cases where that actually has happened, where they basically just work at a base scale and then take back-end participation. And if the film becomes a booming success, they become a great success as well. But it all depends on the project itself, and having an agent to think about, well, will this film make a whole bunch of money in the box office, or do we think it's more about getting a short-term gain or a long-term gain? And sometimes it's not also about the rate. Sometimes it's more about the cachet of the project and working with some creative individuals that you may want to collaborate with down the road, or just having a chance to work with now because they are somebody that you've just been dreaming about working with because they work in a different manner and different process, or is a role that you'd love to be able to envision yourself and challenge you as a creative artist to do something further within yourself and pushing yourself as a creative artist.
So I guess in thinking through the different formulas, they could either, let's say, go front-end heavy and really do a lump sum, right, of a payment, or they can view it more as a collaborative work and a way to not necessarily get financial gain, but get connection gain, if you will, right, of collaborative gain as to who they're involved with. Or let's say they could have, as you mentioned, a smaller front end, but a really potential heavy back end where they can then split the proceeds from the film. And so, yeah, I guess there's as many structures as there are films to formulate it. Well, Anton, just to thank you for submitting your question. You do win the 1 hour ballroom dance lesson, and do please email us with your name to claim your prize, and so we will remit that to you. Thank you so much for tuning in and asking Ryan a question. And so, Ryan, thank you so much for being with us. This brings us to really the end. I'm sorry we ran over time a little bit, but it was very interesting to hear your take on film production and artist involvement. And once again, I'm just going to show people where they can find you, website, email, of course, IMDb. You can check out Ryan's awards, and as mentioned, I'm just going to pull up your award list there, although it's very, very limited. And so I don't know if you have anything else to add before we jump off, but yes, it's been a pleasure. Well,
it was a pleasure working with you, and hopefully this was informative to your audience. And if anyone has any specific questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Hopefully, good luck with your creative endeavors. And the thing that we do is hopefully helping artists create something beautiful and something special that will translate to an audience that creates some meaning for them.
That'll give them goosebumps. That's our goal as well. Thank you so much, Ryan. It was great having you. Have a good evening.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys. Signing off.